Welcome back. You hear Goldberg. Today we'll be talking about this very unfortunate practice in American politics, which I believe prevents people from better understanding their own ideas. I watched this debate between Styx Hexenhammer and Richard Spencer. Now, Spencer is extremely loquacious. He should have stayed in academia. He's not well suited for Punch and Judy politics. Styx Hexenhammer, on the other hand, as I've noted, on balance he's good, but because he cranks out so much content, he has a tendency to give ignorant or just really rotten opinions on major issues. I just didn't realize how bad it had gotten. I mean, this debate was filled with one GOP shill talking point after the other, which is strange for someone who's claiming to be sort of independent and above the fray. Like throughout the stream, he keeps going, I'm not conservative, I'm not libertarian, I'm not MAGA, I'm not part of that. Yeah, but you are kind of, and more than just a little bit. If you remember back in 2014-2015 timeframe, there was this whole coalition or class of YouTubers who christened themselves as either independents, moderates, centrists, libertarians, or classical liberals. And it's not that they were very interested in J.S. Mill or Gladstone, Rothbard, whatever, where they have genuinely nuanced views. It was just that at that time, Obama's second term, liberalism or leftism had a lot of cultural currency, fight the inequality, fight the Wall Street. So these young people wanted to be able to essentially play both sides of the coin. Yeah, I'm kind of on the Republican league, but I don't want to admit it openly. So you have roaming millennial, to a certain extent PJW, Sargon of Akkad, Styx Hexenhammer, and my favorite, this guy who wears a beanie hat and he rides the Harry Potter broom on the very top of the fence, making sure he doesn't vibrate too much to one side or the other, even though you know politically where he stands. It's not being a moderate. These creatures, it's like Brian Stelter. He says, reliable sources, and you have to take them at face value. So if any of these people say they're an independent, they're a moderate, they're not MAGA, not conservative, not a Trump shill, you're supposed to just accept that because otherwise you're disrespecting them. So, yeah, but what are you actually doing beyond just saying it? So what I'll do is go through this debate and just not specifically related to personalities, but the arguments that have been put forth because they're very common amongst people who are either MAGA or I'm not MAGA, but are. So we'll just take a look at them and a lot of the shortcomings in these opinions. One of the first things he says is the Bidenflation. This is a very popular GOP talking point in recent days. Biden's created all this inflation. Now, if you're actually trying to be somewhat impartial and you're not just a partisan shill, you would say, but this is part of a much bigger issue, right? It's not just Biden causing inflation. There was inflation under Trump, just like there was under Obama, under Bush. It's the result of a myriad of government policies that have gone wrong. But even just taking Trump, some business industry executives have said the tariffs on China contributed to inflation in part. But if you look at Trump himself, what did he actually do? So he regularly signed over $1 trillion spending bills, and then he passed the TCJA, which for those of you who don't know, if you keep increasing spending and then you drastically reduce taxes, and I should note, the tax cuts were not really overwhelmingly middle class. They were for the elites, the very people, the corporations and executives who now turn around and fire conservatives for making jokes on Twitter. There was no penalty or like VAT applied to Amazon. There was no tax assessed over Hollywood. Those things would have been very popular. They would have punished those who are actually trying to subvert the country. But did Trump pull that off? No. He just gave a relatively run-of-the-mill GOP tax cut to the population where most of it goes to the top and a little bit to the bottom. Okay? But when you deprive the government of a bunch of revenue while at the same time increasing spending, that creates inflation because the deficit either has to be borrowed or printed. Oh, no. If Trump does it, it's not. Yeah, absolutely it does. This is how basic economics work, monetary fiscal policy. Now, just in 2020, Trump spent, $6.55 trillion. That's the estimate. A lot of that was the COVID response, but still, are you pretending that somehow that didn't factor in? You know, the reality is government money doesn't work this way. Okay, he signs the bill, and now we know the effects of it the next day. No, because that money has different tranches, mandates. It will take time to actually distribute and be felt by the broader economy. This is one of the reasons why. The CARES Act just recently expired. It's not, oh, it's just my year and my presidency. So is it really just Biden's fault because of his $2 trillion package that we have inflation? Or is this simply building up over years, especially the last 12 months or 18 months? An impartial person would ask this question. A shill will just say, oh, it's Biden. Then he says that if Biden had not delegitimized Ghani's government, the Afghan troops would have stood and fought the Taliban. This is one of the biggest neocon shill talking points that I could possibly imagine, which is why it's surprising from that source. It demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of Afghan history and culture, which is, not exactly unsurprising for someone in the MAGA crowd. Afghanistan had a king, then there was Mohammed Daoud Khan, the military dictator, and then you had the Soviet regime. The reason why these troops did not want to fight the Taliban is because they knew you're not going to have America guaranteeing your independence and security, you're not going to have air support or extra troops there to back you up, and you're going to have less money flowing into the country. That money, by the way, generals are going to take their fair share, and then they're going to give some to the line officers. The line officers are going to give some petty cash to the regular enlisted to give them an incentive to fight these whack jobs, all right? They're not going to just do it because patriotic Afghanistan. To actually take sticks seriously, you'd have to believe if Gorbachev had said that he recognized the legitimate government of Dr. Najib, we would still have a Soviet state. You know how stupid that actually sounds? But that's what these people believe because they have to defend Trump. It's all about Trump. All that Trump would have done, by the way, is maybe a 6 months bravely runaway bombing campaign, kill some civilians and say, yeah, you see, we retreated, but at least we did it in style. No, we don't need to make more problems, okay? Now, perhaps Trump would have blocked refugee settlement. I don't know. That'd be very interesting to see. It's just stop making these neocon arguments just because you have to defend your guy. It's really pathetic. So Spencer claims the GOP has this nostalgia for Bush, and Sticks responds by going, no, it's like they want pre-Alzheimer's Ronald Reagan. This was a beauty, to be honest with you, because there's a lot of folks running around pretending Ronald Reagan was this non-interventionist, which is complete lies. Reagan was very much about intervening around the world, especially in proxy conflicts. Reagan probably would have kept us in Vietnam if he had become president earlier. And he did invade Grenada, by the way. He was very involved in, El Salvador, Guatemala, Nicaragua, in Argentina, Jorge Videla, right? Various forces. You can't just lay this aside. Angola, MPLA versus UNITA, Dr. Jonas Savimbi. That was actually even supported by grassroots conservatives like Ralph Reed, Grover Northkist, and who's the other guy? Abramoff. They had this whole coalition to go over there and help them. But maybe the reason why Reagan didn't get involved in another land war the way perhaps Bush did is because you had still the Soviet Union. So the very fact that you have this massive socialistic empire controlling almost half of the world and potentially creating the firecracker potential for a nuclear conflict, you as a president cannot afford to go around saying we're just going to do land wars here and there. But it's not fair to claim, as many of these MAGA people do, that somehow Reagan was this optimistic guy giving people hope and not intervening around the world. That's completely false. And even if you have hope, this probably goes back to the whole question of the myth that I talked about in the SOR book. A lot of right-wingers, they don't really care about the policy as long as they feel inspired. So Bush at one point was the patriotic leader of the country, and you have folks in rural Kentucky and West Virginia voting for Bush, even though their material circumstances are not getting any better, but they're inspired by Bush, right? Bush, the guy who's a shill for the rich. Trump, in many respects, also a shill for the rich. But because he makes them feel good, that makes he's a great president. I think that's just delusion, to be honest with you. And it's that sort of delusion that prevents people from actually realizing there are some flaws with your ideology that may need to be corrected in the future. Spencer proceeds to bring up QAnon, and Sticks goes, that was a leftist LARP created by the legacy media to deceive Trump supporters. was like, okay, here is a good example of how MAGA and conservative people will deny reality that's right in front of them just because they want to defend the system. QAnon is a very interesting phenomenon. Now, some people claim it's a psyop, but if it's a psyop, there's a lot of people who are very willing. And what does that say about you? It's kind of like when people say Care Bears control the US. Well, does that say bad things about them or people who are so gullible that they allow themselves to be controlled and manipulated? Think about it for a second. The people I know who mention Q, and I don't really go around having in-depth political discussions with people because, in the workplace, it's definitely a little bit hazardous. But back in like 2020, probably December, or maybe very early January, before this nonsense happened, I had people telling me, oh, it's not over. You have to listen to Q. And I'm like, are you serious? I thought that was just some meme online. Oh, yeah, listen to Q. Hey, the election's not over. They're going to be able to overturn it. I'm like, okay. So these, by the way, are not people living in a trailer park on welfare checks. These are people who have like six-figure salaries, own houses, are well integrated in the economy, have college education, and they were actually lapping this stuff up. Saying it's a psyop, it becomes harder and harder to believe that when people who are at a more advanced level of income and intelligence are saying the same thing. The reason I believe QAnon had appeal, and this certainly fits the profile of those I talked to, very religious people, especially Christians, there is the whole redemption, salvation, hope message. If you keep getting told, well, yeah, but there's this magical thing that's going to happen, it's going to reverse everything, you're going to have a tendency to keep believing that because you're supposed to have faith, right? You got to have faith, dun, 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 dun. And so that was why immediately after the election, when it became clear that Trump, at least de facto, if not de jure, depending on your opinion, was not going to be president, there are videos coming out. I remember this one guy on, was it BitChute? Oh yeah, I have it on good confidence. The National Guard is running around arresting Democrats. They're trying to get visas to escape to other countries. And people kept lapping it up. People kept insisting it was all going to change because they believe in this kind of salvation narrative. Now, there's nothing wrong with being religious, but understand if this is where politics are heading, just because you keep insisting that there's this mystical, magical person behind the curtain doesn't mean it's going to happen. And it's why it becomes really interesting when they talked about the whole, kerfuffle in January. Here again, we have a bit of a problem. Guys like Sticks and others in MAGA will say, oh no, they were just doing their constitutional right to protest. No one really planned anything. Which, I don't believe it was an organized attempt at anything, although there were people who, no doubt, actually believed they were going to make history and change the system. Because the Republican movement, ever since at least 2009, has relied on these revolutionary-style images, dressed as Continentals, alluding to revolutions, restoring the Constitution. The Second Amendment's there to defend the First, brah. If people continuously follow that content, is it that hard to believe that some of them might actually say, well, screw it, I'm going to do whatever I want? And it's weird, and this is why I might have to write the book on conservatism, even though I'm not going to have a lot of time the next couple months. They spent 2020 saying what? What was their message? Law and order, law and order. If you don't vote for us, you're not going to get law and order, even though you're in charge and you don't have law and order. The cities are being destroyed. People's businesses are going up in flames. But you're supposed to vote for the incumbent person to get law and order, even though they can't keep law and order. That whole message makes sense if you're an opposition party, right? Which some people have claimed GOP is a perpetual opposition party, which makes a lot of sense. Even if they are in power, they're in opposition. So when Trump loses the election, at least de facto, all of a sudden, the question is, do you support the system which all the conservatives are telling you is corrupt and untrustworthy and rigged? Do you defend that law and order, which conservatives rarely revolt against the system? They typically defend the system even if they don't like it. Do you revolt against that system? Law and order, law and order. Or do you say, well, to maintain law and order, we have to prevent this thing from happening because Biden's not legitimately elected? This is a very complicated set of questions. And as time went on, the Supreme Court wouldn't hear it. These audits weren't really getting anywhere. People kept saying, well, the conservative movement, yeah, we got to fight the system, got to stop the steal. So you get to this event in January and you're telling people you're going to lose your country, your democracy, whatever. So you need to stop the steal, but just protest. So was Mike Pence, by certifying, was he defending law and order, or was he being a shill for the system? Then again, if these people had managed to decertify Biden and certify Trump, oh, whoa, that's constitutional and illegal, as our friend here would say. But do you think that half the country would accept it? No, you probably would have had a massive civil conflict. And I would say, yes, probably worse than what happened in January. No doubt. Leftists are a lot more violent in general. But can you imagine what that would have done to the country if you had said, oh, by the way, you're no longer president, it's this person? Don't you think there might have been a lot of angst and desire to like go at each other? So it's not as simple as that's just the Constitution and everyone accepts it. There are different perceptions of the Constitution. Just like saying, oh, it was just Antifa that did this stuff in January is, again, it's like conservatives, they gin up all this anger and resentment, and then they claim, but it's impossible for a conservative to not respect law and order, therefore they have to be Antifa. This is the kind of logic that passes in the MAGA community because they never want to face the fact, okay, we lost. Whether de jure or de facto, we lost. And some of our people have the potential to get a little bit crazy. And trying to deny that, like, no, we're not capable of doing that, you're like, well, then why do you keep talking about all these revolutionary images if you say that's not you? It's just typical politicking and it's not helpful. At the end of the day, you could give Trump credit for the fact that he moved the GOP in a certain direction in terms of ideas. He got them to talk about immigration. He got them to talk about corporations. As a leader, he was pretty much a failure on most of those articles. Now, could someone else, maybe a DeSantis, come and do a better job? Absolutely. But stop thinking about Trump, stop defending Trump, and start talking about the future. Because if you bring Trump back into the White House, you're going to have another 4 years of needless scandals, distractions, and you're not going to be achieving the actual policy, not just the nice speeches and myth and agenda, but the actual policy that makes a difference over the long term for what you claim to believe in.